In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 20th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Indiana versus Purdue. Purdue comes in as the national blue blood in this matchup, with the ranking, the brand name, and that loud Mackey Arena crowd all working in its favor. Indiana walks in as the team catching points, but not as a team that is supposed to roll over and serve as a highlight reel for the home favorite. They already showed that earlier this season when they tagged Purdue with a 72-67 win in Bloomington, and that result still hangs in the back of everyone's mind, especially if you are sitting on the favorite. Indiana's personality this season leans heavily into spacing, patience, and shot making, and that combination is a nightmare when you are trying to protect a big number. They knock down more than 10 threes per game, which has them near the top of the conference and inside the national top group. And the volume is not empty calories, it is tied to a clear identity. They have already piled up over 260 triples while hitting close to 35% from deep and nearly 79% at the free throw line. And those are the kind of details that matter when you are backing a road underdog that needs every possession to carry weight. A team that can trade threes for twos can erase gaps in a hurry, and a team that lives at the line can cash in late when the game turns into a whistle fest and everybody at home is yelling at the refs. Purdue, to be fair, is still a monster. The offense scores in the low 80s per night. They shoot right around 50% from the field, and most analytics pages you open, from KenPom to Torvik, are going to tell you this is one of the most efficient attacks in the country. The problem, from a betting angle, is that the market treats them like a machine that never misfires, even though we just watched them get handled by double digits at Michigan and wobble a bit more against the number than in the straight-up column. Indiana, by contrast, has quietly outscored opponents by about 9 points per game, which hints at a team that might look less glamorous but is far more steady than its underdog status suggests. Ball movement is another quiet edge on the Indiana side. They are sitting on roughly 450 assists, again in the top chunk nationally, which tells you the ball does not stick and that multiple guys touch it before the shot goes up. That kind of unselfish style tends to travel, especially with a veteran guard core that has already passed the stress test of this rivalry once this season. Late in games, that experience shows up in small ways: better decisions on 2-for-1 situations, more calm on inbounds plays, and fewer panic shots when the clock is bleeding out. The situational piece matters too. You have an angry home favorite with revenge on its mind, a rivalry atmosphere that turns every possession into a mini drama, and a point spread that gives the underdog several different paths to get you paid. Indiana does not have to win this outright to matter. They simply need to compete for the full 40 minutes, hang around with their shooting and poise, and either force a tight finish or slide in through that ever-popular backdoor if Purdue lets up late. Given their three-point profile, their free throw reliability, their passing, and the fact that they have already shown they are not scared of the matchup, Indiana looks very live to stay inside the number in a game that should feel a lot more competitive than the narrative around Purdue suggests. As our first pick for this matchup, the Indiana Hoosiers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The total sets up in a very different way. On the surface, it screams points. You pull up a basic stat page and you see Purdue sitting in the low 80s per game, Indiana just over 80, both teams hitting in the high 40s from the field, and your brain instantly goes to fireworks and a score bug that never slows down. That first glance is exactly why the number is so aggressive, and honestly, that is where value often hides. Indiana's season scoring profile is a little bit noisy. They stacked some non-conference games that turned into track meets, and on nights when those 10-plus threes are falling, the box score can look like an NBA outing. Once you zoom in on conference play, especially true road games, the vibe shifts. Opponents are averaging around 71 points, the pace tightens, and the scoreboard looks far more like classic Big Ten basketball on a cold February night than a summer league run. That shows up in the betting record as well, with Indiana hitting the under in 7 of its last 10 overall, 10 of its last 13 on the road, and 12 of its last 14 when slotted as the underdog. Those are not just trends for trend's sake. They paint a picture of a team that keeps games more controlled than its raw season averages suggest. The first meeting between these teams fits that story too. 72-67 lands on a combined 139, which sits well below how people emotionally remember two high-powered offenses clashing. And that was in Bloomington, with Indiana feeding off its home crowd. Now the scene shifts to Mackey. Purdue is chasing payback, and coaches on both sides have fresh game film of how the other wants to attack. In that kind of rematch, you usually see longer possessions, more counters, and fewer easy early clock looks. Purdue's defense gets overlooked because the offense is so loud, but they are still keeping opponents under 70 per night, which is nothing to shrug at. Indiana's three-point heavy style adds volatility to the total, and not just in the way people like to talk about. Hot shooting can obviously spike points, but cold stretches are brutal for an over, and this roster has had nights where the rim looks tiny. Even if Indiana heats up for a stretch, Purdue is more than happy to slow things back down, run deliberate half-court sets, and make each trip burn 30 seconds off the clock. In a rivalry where both coaching staffs now know each other's pet actions, rotations, and late-game habits, possessions start to feel more like chess than checkers. Every cut, every closeout, every misdirection has been scouted. Games like that usually lean on efficiency instead of sheer volume of shots, and that tends to produce solid basketball that does not always explode on the scoreboard. So while the reputation of these offenses and the season-long numbers push people to expect a shootout, the matchup context, the recent form, and the history between these two suggest a game that finishes under what the market is asking for. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. St. Peter's versus Iona. St. Peter's Peacocks head to New Rochelle to take on the Iona Gales on Friday, February 20th, 2026, and it already feels like one of those classic Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference street fights from the moment you look at it. St. Peter's rolls in as the stubborn bus ride underdog, the team that shows up with a chip on its shoulder, while Iona sits at home with the tradition, the banners, and the sense that it should handle business in its own gym. Oddsmakers are treating it as a small edge for the host rather than some automatic blowout spot, which hints that this matchup lives inside a pretty thin margin where every loose ball, every charge call, every little swing actually hurts or helps. That tight, slightly uncomfortable type of game is exactly the kind of environment where St. Peter's tends to feel oddly relaxed. This group is not built to look pretty or chase highlight clips. It is built to slow you down, wreck the rhythm, and turn the night into a half-court grinder where every trip feels like a surprise quiz you never studied for. They live in the high 60s in possessions per game, near the bottom nationally, while Iona prefers something closer to the low 70s, and even though that difference sounds small on paper, in a college game it changes how long each miss seems to hang in the air. If you have watched one of those Friday night Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference games on ESPN+, you know how a few fewer trips up and down the floor can make every empty possession feel twice as heavy and twice as annoying. The first time these two saw each other this season in January, St. Peter's did not just squeak by. It took control in a 77-63 win where the Peacocks outworked Iona on the glass 44-31 and piled up 36 free throw attempts while holding the Gales under 36% shooting. That is not some random one-off for how St. Peter's wins. It is basically a clear photo of their personality on a good night. Over the full season, they sit just over 72 points per game on roughly 41% shooting, which sounds ordinary at first glance, but they squeeze opponents and keep them under about 69 points per night with physical man-to-man defense that people around the league keep pointing to as one of the more disruptive looks in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. On the betting side, they have quietly become one of those teams the casual fan ignores and the spread respects. They are sitting around a 14-8-1 record against the number and have covered roughly two-thirds of the time, especially once conference play turned everything into repeat street fights. Iona, on the other hand, has looked shakier in the short term, going 1-4 straight up over its last 5, leaning a bit more on old home court reputation in this matchup than on what it has actually shown on the floor lately. Historically, that building has been rough for St. Peter's, and plenty of older fans could tell stories about long nights in that gym. But this version of the Peacocks is near the top of the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference standings and already walked away with a double-digit win in the first meeting, so that old fear factor does not land quite the same. With the market still giving Iona respect for its name and home floor while keeping only a small number between these teams, the chance to ride the tougher defense, the stronger recent spread profile, and the side that is most comfortable in a physical slugfest becomes very appealing. As our first pick for this matchup, the St. Peter's Peacocks to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. On the surface, you see Iona putting up around 73 points per game and St. Peter's a shade over 72, and it is easy to think this could turn into a smooth, free-flowing game with plenty of scoring. Here is the thing, when you take a step back and look at how fast these games actually move, that first impression starts to wobble a bit. Iona's outings usually live around 71 possessions a night, but St. Peter's tugs the tempo down closer to 68, and in a conference rematch where both coaching staffs know every set and counter, the slower team usually drags the whole thing into its preferred rhythm. College fans joke that a handful of long possessions can make you feel like you are watching a different sport entirely, and this is one of those spots where that joke feels a little too real. The totals history tells the same story in Boulder, Inc., with Iona sitting around 10-17 against the over, which means a lot more nights ending under the posted number than sailing past it. Look at the recent stretch and it gets even louder, with the total landing on the under in 15 of their last 19 overall, 8 of their last 9 at home, and 6 of the last 7 matchups specifically against St. Peter's. That pattern does not feel like simple randomness. It looks like a team whose defensive rebounding and streaky three-point shooting create long empty trips, a lot of 0 for 2 sequences, and plenty of slow walks back up the floor to set the defense again. St. Peter's plays right into that lower scoring shape as well, with a pretty balanced 10-13 record against the total that recently tilted a bit because of a mini run of overs when the shots were falling, but underneath that they are still the group that keeps opponents around 68-69 points and keeps earning praise for improved man-to-man pressure. The first meeting between these two landed on 140 total points in that 77-63 result, which actually sits right in the general scoring neighborhood we are talking about here, and even that total came with St. Peter's shooting efficiently and stacking up 36 free throws. In a revenge setting for Iona, you would expect a much sharper focus on keeping St. Peter's away from the stripe and off the offensive glass, and that usually means both teams end up playing more half-court possessions and far fewer quick strike attacks. Put all of that together, the slower baked-in pace, the Peacocks being perfectly happy to drag this into the mud, Iona's heavy run of unders at home, and a market that still leans a bit toward the idea of a more open style, and what you get is a matchup that looks much more like a grind than any kind of track meet. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Siena versus Merrimack. Two teams sitting at 18-9 walk into Merrimack's gym, but only one of them has turned that building into a bit of a no-go zone for visitors this season. Merrimack has been perfect at home at 9 wins and 0 losses on a 6-game roll, and they have covered the number in 5 straight, yet the market still treats this as a close call with only a small gap between these two on paper. That is the funny thing about a long home streak. People get used to it and start treating it like background noise, but inside a small college arena it feels like a weekly event. The band is louder, the student section is closer, and every deflection gets a roar instead of polite applause. Siena is not exactly intimidated by road trips either. Their season has been built on real road toughness and a group that actually seems to enjoy walking into someone else's building and quieting the crowd. They already saw this team once, and Merrimack walked into Albany and snuck out with a 63-59 win, which always leaves a little sting and a little extra focus in the rematch, especially when you know you let a few possessions slip in crunch time. Revenge spots are not magic, but they do matter mentally when a coaching staff has film of a close loss and a locker room full of players who remember exactly how it felt on the way back to campus. Since that first meeting, Merrimack's identity has just solidified. They sit in that disruptive zone, arms everywhere, and they make every catch feel like it has a hand attached to it already. The backcourt of Kaver Kennedy and Ernest Shelton gives them a nice blend of control and fireworks. Kennedy running the show as a freshman who already looks like he has been doing this for years, and Shelton stretching the floor so far that defenders end up defending spots more than players. Kennedy is putting up 17.7 points and 4.1 assists per game, which is not just empty scoring, it is a steady drumbeat of on-ball decisions that keep their offense steady even when the game slows to a crawl. Shelton recently tied the school's single-game mark with 9 made threes against Boston University, and performances like that linger in scouting reports because once a guy has done that, coaches are not sleeping easily the night before they see him again. Siena has plenty of shot creation of their own, with Gavin Doty and Justice Schultz giving them guards who do not short-circuit when they see a zone and who can still probe, kick, and hit those mid-range pockets that zones are supposed to take away. Antonio Chandler just reminded everyone at Marist that he can flip a game with energy and efficient scoring inside the arc, and sometimes that kind of veteran forward play is exactly what you need against a zone that wants you to settle for threes all night. It is not a case of one team having talent and the other not. It is more about which team's strengths tie directly into the cracks of the matchup. And here the way Merrimack lengthens possessions and bothers ball handlers is a very direct counter to what Siena usually wants to do. The numbers against the spread back that feeling up, which is always comforting when your eyes and the data are telling the same story. Merrimack has been excellent as favorites, with a 9-2 record against the spread in that role, so they are not just winning when expected, they are exceeding the bar that is set for them most nights. Siena has been decent in their own right against the number, but their profile is more steady than dominant, which is fine across a season, yet a bit less appealing when you are talking about walking into a building where the home team has not lost and has been rewarding backers over and over. Injuries tilt the subtle details too, and those details tend to matter in these tight games where every rotation player feels important. Siena comes in nicked up, with Reed Ducharme sidelined by a shoulder issue, Tasman Goodrick out for the year with a knee problem, and Owen Schlager dealing with ribs, all listed out, and that shortens the ways they can mix and match lineups over 40 minutes. Merrimack, on the other hand, shows no major injuries on the main boards, which means their core rotation and their defensive identity should be fully intact for a game that already leans toward their preferred style. In a matchup that figures to live in the half-court, where loose balls, deflections, and long, late-clock possessions decide who feels comfortable, the combination of home invincibility, a locked-in defensive system, and a more complete rotation tilts the spread conversation in one clear direction. As our first pick for this matchup, the Merrimack Warriors to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Siena is averaging around 71 points per game and giving up about 66.1, which puts them in that elite band defensively, and you can feel that in the way their games often look, more chess than track meet. Merrimack is in a similar lane, scoring roughly 68.4 and allowing about 66.7, so both sides live in a world where mid-60s is a perfectly normal final score. When two teams built like that get together, the total tends to become a story about who blinks and speeds up first, and the honest answer here is that neither of them really wants to be the one to do that. Their first meeting landing at 63-59 is a neat little snapshot of what these rosters and coaching styles naturally produce. Nothing about how either team has evolved suggests they suddenly want a game in the mid-70s, trading haymakers and pushing off every miss. Merrimack's zone is built to muddy things up. It shrinks driving lanes, forces extra passes, and quietly shaves seconds off the clock almost every trip, which is exactly the kind of scheme that keeps combined scores down over time. Siena's recent surge has come with deliberate, connected half-court play, with Schultz, Doty, and Chandler working together to squeeze real value out of each possession rather than chasing quick, early clock looks just because they are there. It sounds a bit old school, but this is very much a value every trip matchup instead of a first to 80 wins one. The historical trends back that up in a very stubborn way. Merrimack games have finished under the posted total in 18 of 27 outings this season, and their overall record against the number on total sits at 9-18, which is quite a statement about how often the scoring stays below expectations. Siena is sitting at 10-17 against the total, so they lean the same direction, and when both sides carry that kind of under-heavy history, it is usually not a coincidence. That is two separate schedules, two separate coaching staffs, and yet the same storyline, defense, grind, and a lot of nights where fans are clapping for shot clock violations instead of lob dunks. Recent box scores tell the same story in a slightly more vivid way. Merrimack's current buzz stretch includes a 56-49 rock fight at Quinnipiac, a script where their defense slowly squeezed the game and the final total never really threatened to balloon. Siena has shown the same comfort level with low-scoring wins, including that 67-63 road result at Marist and a 74-52 road win at Canisius, both games where their defense and patience set the tone rather than any kind of pedal-down pace. Coaches in games like this often secretly prefer a 62-58 style ending, something controlled and methodical, over a chaotic 78-75 shootout that can swing on a random heat check. When you layer the scoring averages, the previous meeting, the season-long under-trends, and the recent run of grindy finishes on both sides, the expectation of another lower scoring, possession-by-possession kind of night becomes pretty hard to argue with. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. VCU versus St. Louis. VCU visiting St. Louis on Friday, February 20th, feels like one of those late-season games that everyone circles on the calendar. St. Louis rolls in with a shiny 24-2 record and a national ranking in the teens, while VCU shows up at 21-6, still chasing that comfortable tournament spot and knowing this one will show up on every resume breakdown later. The game sits inside Chaifetz Arena on a Friday night, lights bright, crowd loud, and the number out there basically asking whether St. Louis is as strong as the record suggests or just a good story that has benefited from a friendly schedule. The St. Louis profile comes off almost cartoonish at first glance because averaging a little over 90 points per game while winning by more than 22 points a night does not happen by accident. They shoot better than 51% from the field and over 40% from deep, and they stack nearly a +10 edge on the glass per game, which is the type of thing you feel in the other team's legs by the second half. It is not just a pretty shooting chart, it is the constant pressure of good looks, second chances, and that creeping feeling that every defensive mistake will be punished quickly. VCU is not some soft spot on the schedule, though, and that matters. They put up around 84 points per game, they win their own contests by double digits on average, and they live at the free throw line with one of the highest foul drawing rates in the country, which is a sneaky way to bend a game when shots are not dropping. They do allow roughly 73 points per outing, and their defense can be more bendable than breakable at times, especially when they face a team that can spread them out and punish overhelping. So you get this weird mix, a dangerous offense that leans on whistles, facing a machine that just keeps putting shots on the board and crashing the glass hard. Their first meeting back in early January told a very specific story. St. Louis walked into Richmond on January 7th and left with a 71-62 road win, holding VCU to about 29% shooting from the field and keeping that game firmly inside their preferred rhythm rather than letting it turn into the free-flowing track meet that VCU usually wants at home. That is not a one-point escape. That is a solid road performance where the favorite looked comfortable playing its game in the other building. Now everything flips to Chaifetz, and that is a different kind of test for the visiting side. St. Louis has been steamrolling opponents in that gym, piling up wins and margin while feeding off crowds that routinely clear 6,000 fans and sound like more when a run gets going. A second-year staff has already turned this group into one of the most efficient offenses in the country with a pace that sits in the national top 25, which means there are no long stretches where possessions feel wasted or stagnant. On the other bench, a first-year head coach for VCU is still stitching together rotations and chemistry on the fly, which is impressive at 21-6 but also makes a high-pressure road setting like this feel even heavier. The health and depth picture tilts things further. Public reports show no key pieces from St. Louis listed as out, which is exactly what you want if you are coaching a team that relies on relentless spacing and rebounding. VCU, on the other hand, lists forward Christian Furman out indefinitely for personal reasons and forward Obinaya Okafor uncertain with an undisclosed issue, and that kind of quiet front-court attrition is the last thing you want when you are trying to survive a full game against an elite rebounding attack and constant perimeter threats. You can already picture it, a slightly thinner VCU front line asked to battle through 40 minutes of closeouts, box outs, and mismatches that keep forcing tough choices between protecting the rim and respecting shooters. If this game unfolds like so many St. Louis home dates have, the pattern is familiar. They hit a few early threes, they grab extra boards, VCU spends energy chasing and fouling to stay attached, and by the time the final media timeout hits, the gap on the scoreboard often reflects not just who is better, but who had more ways to score all night. Those last couple of minutes can look less like a coin flip and more like routine closing time, with the home side playing from in front and the numbers sitting in comfortable territory rather than on a knife's edge. As our first pick for this matchup, the St. Louis Billikens to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total tells a very different kind of story, and honestly it can make you blink a little. It sits in a range that screams shootout, the kind of number that suggests fireworks from start to finish, and you can see why when you check what these offenses do on an average night. St. Louis scores about 90.2 points per game and allows around 67.8, which pushes their typical combined total to roughly 158 points. VCU is not far behind in that sense, putting up about 83.7 points and giving up roughly 72.6, which lands their usual combined games in the mid-150s. Blend those profiles together and you end up in the high 150s zone, not the hypercharged territory that the current number implies, so you are already asking both teams to live at the very top end of their usual scoring band for a full 40 minutes. The funny thing is that despite all the offensive fireworks, the actual betting results on totals have been fairly modest. St. Louis sits just a touch above even on overs for the season, with a slightly stronger lean to higher scoring results at home, but nothing wild. VCU lands around the same area, also a little above even but hardly an automatic over team, which is a big clue that the market has been pricing their pace and scoring punch pretty aggressively all year. Their first meeting landed on 133 total points, 71-62, in a game that many people expected to sail higher, and that real-world sample still sits in the background when you imagine how a second round might play out. Defensively, St. Louis is not just fast, it is nasty in a very clean way. They sit in the national top 25 in adjusted defensive efficiency and hold opponents to about 36.5% shooting overall and just 27.6% from behind the arc, which is exactly how you choke off the kind of rhythm that creates truly huge totals. That combination of pace and stinginess means games can feel quick to the eye while still finishing a few possessions short of the massive numbers people anticipate. VCU's offensive style adds another twist. They rely heavily on drawing contact and getting to the free throw line, with a foul drawing rate that sits inside the national top 10, which can absolutely juice a total if whistles are constant and both teams are living in the bonus. If St. Louis defends without fouling at home, though, VCU suddenly has to rely much more on making tough shots over a well-organized defense rather than stacking easy points at the stripe. That shifts the math in a big way, since trips that might have produced 2 free throws become contested jumpers or empty possessions. Context matters too in late February for a game like this. Both teams know seeding and resumes are on the line, rotations tighten, and possessions often get just a little more deliberate, even for groups that normally love to run. Coaches lean into half-court execution, trusted sets, and matchups they like, which can stretch individual possessions and lead to stretches where the clock moves faster than the scoreboard. It is not that the game suddenly turns slow or dull, it is that every trip means more, and players feel that in their decision-making. Layer on the memory of that first matchup, where St. Louis dragged VCU down to 62 points in Richmond, and it becomes easier to imagine a sequel that still features a lively tempo and plenty of action, but stops short of the sky-high number hanging on the board. The ingredients for offense are still there, no question, yet the mix of strong home defense, controlled fouling, and late-season tension points more toward a game that lands a few possessions below expectation rather than one that keeps climbing all night. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Bowling Green versus Miami, Ohio. Bowling Green stepping into Miami, Ohio on a Friday night feels less like a regular conference game and more like they are walking onto a stage where everyone already expects a certain script. The Redhawks have built this perfect run, sitting at 26-0 overall and unbeaten in league play. And that kind of record does not just happen by catching a few teams napping. It comes from a group that keeps showing the same habits, game after game, especially in their own building where they have not taken a loss yet. The home floor advantage here is more than just a familiar gym and a short walk from the locker room. It is the kind of environment where every made shot from Miami feels a little louder, every Bowling Green turnover feels a little heavier, and the pressure on the visitor grows one possession at a time. Miami has been playing like a team that knows exactly who it is, leaning on an offense that hums at a high level, hitting shots at a rate that forces opponents to constantly chase the game instead of dictating it. When a team is knocking down more than half of its looks from the field and is comfortable spacing the floor, it stretches defenses thin and exposes any hesitation. Bowling Green can absolutely score, and they have had nights where the ball moves, they get downhill, and everything looks smooth, but their road profile has been more uneven, with some strong wins mixed in with the kind of flat performance that can get you run out of a gym. There is also that mental piece that numbers never fully capture. Facing an undefeated team, especially one with a national spotlight starting to follow it, tends to bring out one of two versions of a challenger. Sometimes you get the fearless version that swings freely, and sometimes you get the version that tightens up when the game turns. Miami, on the other hand, has already walked through a lot of these different looks. They have handled opponents who tried to slow things down, opponents who tried to turn it into a sprint, and opponents who hoped they would finally crack under the pressure of staying perfect. Each time, the Redhawks have found ways to separate, often by stacking together those stretches where their shot-making and crowd energy combine, like a run in a pickup game when one side suddenly cannot miss and every miss on the other side feels like 2 mistakes instead of 1. Bowling Green is not stepping in as a pushover. They have enough talent to land some early punches, and you can easily picture a stretch where they trade buckets and look comfortable. The question is what happens over the full 40 minutes when Miami keeps rolling out fresh shooting, keeps getting good looks, and keeps forcing Bowling Green to answer again and again without many empty possessions. That kind of constant pressure usually favors the home favorite that lives on efficient scoring, especially when the visitor has already shown a tendency to wobble in tougher road spots. As our first pick for this matchup, the Miami, Ohio Redhawks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Miami has been playing like one of the most explosive offenses in the country, regularly living in the upper 80s and 90s, and doing it with real structure behind the fireworks. They are not just jacking shots and hoping. They run actions that create clean looks, they hit from deep at a high clip, and they convert inside with strong finishing. When a team is that efficient across all 3 levels, it forces the opponent to keep pace or risk seeing the game slip away in a hurry. Bowling Green brings its own scoring punch to the table, which matters a lot when you start thinking about how many total points this game can climb to. They are used to playing with rhythm, pushing the ball enough to avoid a slog, and they can knock down shots well enough to hang in a track-style game for long stretches. Their offense is not perfect, but it is lively, and when a group like that gets thrown into a setting with a fast, flowing home attack, you often end up with both sides getting chances to run their stuff and stack points. It is a bit like watching 2 offenses in football that both want to throw the ball early and often. Even if one is better, the style usually invites a lot of possessions and a lot of scoring chances. The tempo here should sit in that comfortable zone where neither team is dragging possessions deep into the clock every trip, and neither is completely reckless. That sweet spot often produces games where both teams have enough time to discover their rhythm, lose it for a moment, then find it again. Miami can put together those bursts where they score on 5 or 6 trips in a row. Bowling Green, even if they cannot match every run, usually finds enough offense to push back with their own counters, whether that is a quick-hitting action, a transition pull-up, or a drive that leads to free throws. Speaking of free throws, in games like this, the late stages can turn into a parade to the line, especially if the trailing side tries to stretch the clock, and those final few minutes can quietly add a surprising number of points. Recent history between teams with these styles often features scorelines that look more like shootouts than chess matches. You can picture this one following a similar path, with Miami leaning into its usual high output and Bowling Green doing enough scoring of its own to keep the pace honest and the total climbing. There may be brief pockets where defenses settle in, but with this much shot making on the floor and this many offensive options, those quiet stretches rarely last long before someone strings together another surge. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.